Welcome everyone. The webinar will begin shortly and will be recorded. Connect with the campaign for grade level reading on social media. On Facebook, like the page Campaign for GLR. On Twitter, follow the account at Reading by Third. And on LinkedIn, follow us at Campaign for GLR. Please use hashtag Learning Tuesdays and tag us to tweet anything you learned from today's webinar, and we'll be sure to retweet. We encourage you to share your questions, reflections, and observations on social media. Okay, once again, welcome to today's webinar. My name is Sierra Sanchez, and I'll be behind the scenes helping to produce this conversation. I have just a few housekeeping details before we get started. First, we would love for you to introduce yourself, so please use the chat box at the bottom of the screen to share your name, city or state, and your organization. Be sure to select both panelists and attendees so that we all know who is here. All attendees are in listen-only mode, but we encourage your engagement by posting questions in the Q&A box, as we'll be dedicating some time towards the end of the conversation to respond to those questions. The webinar is being recorded and live streamed on Facebook. That recording, as well as any resources and slides shared during the conversation, will be shared in a follow-up email to all who registered. And finally, we'll be posting a brief poll right towards the end of the conversation and highly encourage you to respond. This helps us with our commitment to continuous improvement. Also, before we start, I'd like to call your attention to our upcoming learning and engagement opportunities. Next week on February 7th, we have the chance to explore the unique scientific framework about how humans learn and explore its relevance to literacy in our session titled Learning to Read, Applying Universal Design for Learning. The following week, on February 14th, we have an exciting doubleheader with the Crucible of Practice Salon at 12:30 Eastern Time, looking at opportunity culture and its positive impacts for educators and students. At 3 p.m. later that day, join us for another in our series with New America, where we'll discuss creating environments and conditions for thriving kindergarten. We'll be sure to add links in the chat box for information and registration, and we hope you can join us. Joining you now is Emily Samos, Senior Consultant with the Campaign for Grade Level Reading. Thank you and enjoy the webinar.
Thank you, Sierra, and hello, everybody, and welcome to each and every one of you, and thank you for joining us for today's GLR Learning Tuesdays webinar titled Smart ESSER Investments, Leveraging Edtech for Equitable Learning Acceleration. We are super excited for today's discussion that is a follow-on to our session from December 13th, when we took some time to follow the money and understand how states and districts are spending the $190 billion that was included in the federal recovery dollars known as the Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund, or ESSER. In that session, after looking at data revealing how much has been spent and on what, we took a peek into what smart ESSER investments look like and how these funds are being spent on strategies to support equitable learning recovery. Since we are now at the halfway mark in the timeline for ESSER spending, it is important to look at what has been effective so districts can double down in the next 2 years and truly make an impact. Over the next several months, CGLR will engage in a series of sessions that will take deep dives into specific smart investments and strategies that we see as worthy big bets that have the potential to make real impact if invested and implemented now and sustained, very important to sustain, even beyond the current influx of federal support. And today we get the chance to take a deep dive into technology-enhanced teaching and learning, or instructional technology, or EdTech as it's termed in most of the headlines, as a primary strategy for equitable learning recovery. So what does it look like when a district is using EdTech throughout its curriculum? And knowing that a digital divide persists, how can EdTech be used if not all students have access to broadband at home? And what are the key tactics and strategies that educators need to employ to ensure that students from low-income families, those hardest hit by the pandemic, can understand and use technology tools to accelerate their learning? And which tools are the most effective? Well, so today we have the chance to explore all of these questions with a few stellar district leaders and our colleague at Whiteboard Advisors and learn what this smart investment looks like on the ground. We'll hear more about what it means for local education agencies to invest in instructional technology as a strategy to recover and accelerate learning. And to begin our conversation, I'm honored to welcome and briefly introduce our esteemed moderator, who will also serve as a presenter with us today. And please note that full bios have been posted in the chat, linked in the chat. And so what we're going to talk through today will be really brief. So our awesome moderator and presenter today is Anna Edwards, who is the co-founder and chief advocacy officer of Whiteboard Advisors, where for nearly 2 decades, she has worked with leaders at the federal, state, and local levels on K-12 education policy. And so now I am super excited to turn it over to Anna to introduce our panel and start our great conversation.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Emily. Thank you for putting together this great conversation today. One of the most humbling and just wonderful parts of my job is actually getting to connect with state and district leaders around the country to talk about what's working for their students, which is why when Ralph Smith and the Campaign for Grade Level Reading came to us and say, hey, would you want to talk about this topic? There were no 3 other people that I thought would be great to come to the table to join you today than the wonderful panelists that we have today. So just really grateful to the campaign for this opportunity to share a little bit about what we're seeing play out from a policy perspective, in terms of trends and updates from the U.S. Department of Education, and then to hear firsthand about how decisions about EdTech and instructional technology are being made at the local level. So with that, I'd love to flip it to the next slide and do a quick introduction of the discussants that you will hear from shortly. Sean Bird, Chief Academic Officer from Houston Independent School District in Texas. I've known Sean since he was in Philadelphia, Los Angeles before that, in Portland, Oregon, where he has really led amazing interventions and implementations of instructional technology to support academic achievement for all students. Leanne Bradshaw, Associate Superintendent with Orange County Public Schools. We've loved hearing from Leanne about how they're incorporating technology into plans to support reading and ELA instruction for students, as well as math and helping teachers to use the technology. And then Sophia Mendoza, Director of Instructional Technology in Los Angeles Unified School District. Sophia also sits on the board of ISTE and is one of the nation's foremost leaders in talking about the role of technology in supporting educators and students and preparing them for the jobs of the future. So as soon as we get through a few framing slides, we'll hear from these amazing district leaders. First, just wanted to level set on what's happening with ESSER funding. What's the current state of play? So if you could flip to the next slide, please, that would be great, Sierra. Just a quick update on the $190 billion refresher from what you guys heard in December. We had 3 major stimulus packages with funding for K-12 education, a $13 billion package that came at the beginning of the pandemic. Most of that funding went to just the emergent needs related to pandemic response. So PPE and immediate shift to remote instruction, broadband access, air filters and purifiers. It went out really quickly in March of 2020. The second 2 packages are still what we have on the table right now. The $54 billion that came out in Carissa, which was in December of 2020. And then in March of 2021, we had the $122 billion influx of ESSER funds in the ARP package. And that's really, by and large, what we have to still work with today. If you flip to the next slide, I can show you how much of the funding is left. It's like the almost $200 billion question that we get asked every day at Whiteboard, whether from state leaders, district leaders, investors, or philanthropists, how much of this $200 billion is left. As of January 2023, so the most recent data from the U.S. Department of Education, only about 34% of ESSER funding across the first package and then ESSER 2 and 3 has actually been spent. So there's a considerable amount still on the table. 96% of ESSER 1 has been spent down, 60% of ESSER 2, and only 19% of ESSER 3, which again was that $122 billion package, has been spent. Now, the numbers are misleading, and our district leaders will tell you who are on today that just because the obligation figures haven't been reported into the U.S. Department of Education, doesn't mean that the dollars are free and open and available, because there's a lot going on behind the scenes depending on the state with the funding. And many districts are starting to plan for potential fiscal cliffs after the funding goes away. They're looking at things like declining enrollment, which will have a major impact on their per student funding. So it seems like, oh, wow, there's still a ton of money left on the table. In some cases, districts are actually thinking through plans to use funding for offsetting potential budget shortfall down the road. But that doesn't mean that there isn't still innovation left to be done. And that's why the U.S. Department of Education issued guidance last week clarifying that Edtech, especially evidence-based technology and tools and strategies for teachers to use those technologies wisely to support learning acceleration, is absolutely an encouraged use of those funds by the U.S. Department of Education. And I think we're going to hear a lot more from Secretary Cardona, the Deputy Secretary, the Office of Education Technology in the coming months, talking about specific examples of where funding is being used really well to support effective use of technology for instructional purposes. And that's what our district leaders are here to talk about today. One other note, I think we talk a lot about the September 30th, 2024 deadline for the obligation of ESSER 3. So the biggest tranche of $122 billion has the longest runway for spending the funds, which is another reason why we see only 19% have been spent down. One other interesting development in December, so since the last time the campaign convened folks to talk about ESSER, is that the Department of Education clarified that contracted services can take place up to 4 years after the obligation date. So that means that a district can enter into a multi-year contract with an EdTech solution provider, even past that September 30th of 2024 deadline. It's confirming what we already know, and oftentimes states have various procurement laws around multi-year contracts that you'd need to pay attention to, but it's definitely something worth noting as solution providers and district leaders think together about sustaining the implementation of these important technologies past the deadline of September 30th, 2024. So we're closely following that. I think, the other interesting thing to think about with these funds is just the fact that it's been a big challenge for districts to actually work through the contracting process to get that much funding out the door. And so a lot of times, even for planned expenditures for various EdTech solutions or instructional material solutions, the procurement process has been delayed. And so I think that's another lag that we're seeing reflected in these stats. I like to joke as an Atlanta native that $200 billion, close to $200 billion being put into state education agencies and school districts is like a snowstorm hitting Georgia. And oftentimes there weren't plows, right, to be able to get the funds out of the way. And so they just sat there. Like any of you from Georgia know, when we get a big snowstorm, we just don't have the infrastructure in place to effectively move the snow quickly. So I think those are some of the high level observations that we have on the funding. And I think the big takeaway here is there's still a lot of funding out there. And that's exactly what the department is encouraging folks to look at. So I think we can get to the next slide, if you don't mind. Yep, just a few high level observations that the department put out on 2021 spending of ESSER funds. Big buckets of expenditures were for academic, social, and emotional needs, big focus on tutoring services, which I know the campaign's been thinking a lot about, instructional materials rollout, and those sorts of important expenditures, including also the technology purchases like learning management systems, digital courses, one-to-one devices, and all of the infrastructure that goes towards implementing online programs. That also was a part of operational continuity, which we saw a lot from that first round. Physical health and safety, as we mentioned, that was a big priority in the first round of CARES Act dollars. And then mental health supports. We're seeing more and more investments in important mental health supports for students and increasingly for educators as well. So just a quick update that the department put out in the end of the year on 2021 spending that we wanted to flag. And we can go to the next slide here. Just a few updates on EdTech and ESSER and digital learning, and some high-level trends that we're seeing. There's been a massive investment, particularly with the CARES Act and the first round of ESSER funds on closing the digital divide. We've made great strides since that first beginning of the pandemic moment where so many students were left without access at home and without devices. 87% of districts are now issuing one-to-one mobile devices. You'll hear Leanne from Orange County talking about that, as well as Sophia and Sean. But what the first two tranches of funding allowed districts to do was really to make sure that that infrastructure was in place. We saw hotspots going out to homes, investments in broadband, investments in Chromebooks and all kinds of devices so that students could access learning online. And now the big question is, how do we access and leverage that infrastructure moving forward in more of a hybrid way? And so we're seeing a lot of conversations taking place around the professional development to support flipped classrooms and that sort of thing. We've also seen some consumer expectations shift, with parents really getting a front row seat to what their students were learning, both the good parts of online learning and some of the challenging ones. But, I think what we're seeing in survey data coming out is that there is an expectation now moving forward that technology is going to be integrated into a student's instructional experience, and that parents, by and large, are on board for that. 86% of teachers think EdTech will be critical for the upcoming years, and we're only seeing that number rise. And then the last piece, I alluded to this earlier, but more supply. So investments in digital content and platforms. We've seen states roll out learning management systems. TEA also has rolled out digital high quality instructional materials to support district adoption. And Sean can talk about how that's playing out in Houston a bit. The South Carolina Department of Education purchased multiple learning management systems, Nevada, Canvas for All, Mississippi also looking at complete, access to learning management systems. So I think we're only going to see more of that infrastructure in place that then allows for differentiation at the local level and at the school level. So just some high level trend data there. We can flip to the next slide. We just have one more before we get to our conversation. And this is the 2022 CETA State EdTech Trends Report. We highlighted some links in the resources to this data for you all as well. But we did have 59% of states state that they have initiatives relating to broadband, 54% to cybersecurity, 53% on technology for instruction, Wi-Fi 21%, and other infrastructure 16%. Interestingly, this is state level investments, and states only got a small percentage, 10 and 20% of overall ESSER funding. Really, by and large, it was the districts that are going to have the most funding for that technology for instruction. So the fact that we saw that 53% number for technology for instruction from state education agencies was actually quite high. So we were excited to see that. With that, I think we can flip to conversation now that we've gotten a little framing of what's in place, and we will have links going out. Thank you for the question, to the slides that we shared, and happy to provide the additional resources and survey data that was reflected in here as well. I am just looking quickly too, before we jump to Megan's question about districts being able to forward fund to utilize services as part of a multi-year agreement. The answer to that is yes, the U.S. Department of Education did clarify that they could go no more than 4 years past the obligation date. So if the obligation date was pushing all the way up into September 30th of 2024, which is the obligation deadline, that would get them 4 years past that date, which I know a bunch of districts were very relieved to see, as were solution providers looking for sustainability of solutions. So yeah, with that, I'd love to jump into conversation with our wonderful panelists that are on the ground, seeing how these EdTech solutions are playing out for their districts. Greetings. So I'd love to start with a little bit of an around the horn. And maybe first you could just reintroduce yourself and your role in your districts, and just share a quick update on what role you see technology play in supporting learning recovery. I know post NAEP release in October, those math and ELA results caught a lot of folks off guard, probably not you all, because you've been watching this data for a long time. But yeah, maybe Sean, we can kick it off with you, and then Leanne, and then Sophia with just quick update on how technology is playing a role in learning recovery for your districts.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sean Bray. I'm the Chief Academic Officer for the Houston Independent School District. And technology is, of course, playing a big role in our efforts. As Anna mentioned, the state of Texas has made a pretty big investment in high quality instructional materials that have digital platforms included. So as we are adopting new materials, we this year have 78 of our 284 schools that have adopted HQIM materials. And next year it'll be all but about 10 of our schools will adopt those HQIM materials. So, what we learned definitely from the pandemic was that, we had learned lots of lessons, but we want to leverage technology in different ways. So that's really, the teacher is a huge part of making that successful. So we're spending our time and money on really developing our teachers to be able to leverage technology in ways that are not the same way that kids learned at home, but different ways. But we did learn some lessons about how we can leverage technology, and we've done that in a variety of ways. We even have in our fine arts department, we have use technology differently, so artificial intelligence, things like that. So we're trying to use technology across the content areas, but it really is a heavy part of our investment for the core content areas.
Wonderful. Leanne, what about you all in Orange County?
Hi, I'm Leanne Bradshaw, and I'm the Associate Superintendent, and I work with professional learning, leadership development, and parent-family engagement, all things that fall into professional learning. So Orange County, like you said, Anna, we have been blessed for about 10 years to be a one-to-one digit district. And so prior to the pandemic, our students and teachers had some familiarity, and so they were able to pivot a little quicker than we had thought. And so when we returned to school, we really valued the ability to leverage that technology and provide opportunities for personalized learning, because we had different levels and we knew that we had a lot of interventions. So we really worked with reading, science, mathematics, and intervention softwares, but all subjects, and really focusing on engagement, interventions, the core plus more. ESSER funding allowed us to use interventionists to find some of those deficiencies or gaps that our kids have had or maybe acquired during the hybrid time. So we've really worked on tutoring as well as those interventions in class and MTSS. One thing that's neat that I would like to highlight that we had an opportunity to do is implement virtual peer-to-peer tutoring and to help recover learning, and a lot of collaboration and engagement has come out of that. So using that with our university students, but also our peer-to-peers, it has been a neat way to use technology.
Love that. Sophia, what about in LA?
Well, it's definitely looking at this recovery times, really thinking about the impact that EdTech is going to have on literacy, numeracy, and social emotional well-being. So taking a look at how might that artificial intelligence support us with that work, the opportunities that virtual reality XR brings to the table. And I think a big piece we've seen over time is how critical knowledge awareness is for not only our educators, but of course for our students, and how computer science education is impacting them right now. This really goes back to, and at some time, I know I'm going to talk about this later, is really having a thoughtful, well laid out strategic plan to guide us in this work. And later on, I'll have an opportunity, hopefully, to share that with you. But the impacts are going to be felt in literacy, numeracy, and social emotional well-being.
It's a wonderful framing. Can't wait to come back to some of that later. Leanne, I'd love to talk a little bit about literacy. Obviously, this is a campaign for grade level reading webinar, and I know in Orange County, K-5 literacy has been a big focus, and you've been working very intentionally on the role that technology can play in K-5 literacy instruction. Would love for you to talk a little bit about how that's playing out there in Orange County.
So K-5 literacy is really our emphasis going into our next school year, but we have been really studying this for the past couple of years in the science of reading and structured literacy and all of the components. But we use a blended model in our elementary schools, which is a mix of print and digital resources. So where we use a variety of EdTech resources, and just like Sophia mentioned, exploring how we can use AI and VR to assist with that personalized learning. So we have a newly adopted textbook series that provides robust digital resources, and that's our tier 1. And we're able to differentiate instruction, but beyond the core, we are really linking into a lot of EdTech resources, everything from reading A to Z, Raz Kids, Brain Pop, and so forth, but really to build and to scaffold and to work with engagement. Engagement has been such a piece that has generated success for us. So working with our teachers for that, and we have had the access through our digital learning teams, our digital curriculum teacher leaders. So for the past 10 years, we've been able to develop that, but now it was putting it in practice. And we found that we weren't using all of our products to fidelity, and going back into looking at what really was the intention of using that piece of software or that resource, and doing a much better job with professional learning. So that's me, and getting us into doing that side by side with our teachers. Another thing that I would say that we partnered with we have 2 libraries, our school libraries and our Orange County library system provided access to all of our schools to a virtual library card, so they could download all of the resources, and a lot more of connections to the text were able to be found during that time. And we've also rolled it into our family engagement this year. We're doing a big parent academy this weekend. We have innovative bedtimes books, and that's an initiative that some of our struggling families are using. We're providing books and lessons for that. Reading workshops are provided by our parent engagement liaisons in all of our schools, and each of our parents are receiving those 5 I'll read to you and you read to me books, and also digital copies of those books. So the kids are able to see both if they look in print, and depending on the mode that the teacher was using during that time, getting that familiarity. And they're able to log their minutes with Beanstack, and our PBIS in our schools are able to promote literacy. So we have a concentrated effort with our core and interventions, but it comes back to engagement, that interventions, being able to scaffold, apply, practice, and look at the data, and where do we go next? And EdTech has been able to accelerate our work with that.
It's so interesting. I love the word engagement too. I have an 8 and a 6-year-old, and I can tell you, like, when they're on those devices, they are engaged. And so making sure that you have the programs that will both engage and then provide the academic outcomes that you're looking for. I think it's such a great point. I know that a big part of making sure that the engagement translates into academic outcomes is implementation. And we hear both from solution providers and from school district leaders all the time that the best intervention in the world, the best EdTech solution in the world, if it isn't implemented with fidelity, you're probably not going to see the impact that the research would show. And so I'm curious to know, Leanne, it sounds like you've done a lot of training to make sure that that educators are bought in, but would love to hear from you on that. And then Sophia, I know that's a big part of what you're doing as well, and Sean as well. Just how do you make sure that that you have the fidelity of implementation that you want to see?
So it is important when we look at the products that we look at the whole product, not that we're going to just take pieces and parts and try to make it work for us. So to follow the fidelity of the implementation as well as the research that goes with it, and taking the time to train our teachers, and not only train them, but then be able to have our models be able to be side by side with them as they implement. And so it's not anyone going at it alone. And we have found that that has been an opportunity for our teachers to be more vulnerable and to take the risk because they felt safer and they felt supported. And we have an amazing curriculum and digital learning team that goes out and works with all schools, but specifically if there is a problem, we can check someone out and go and have them go and support our schools.
That's amazing. And Sophia, now accomplishing this in the second largest district in the country, would love to hear how you're thinking about fidelity of implementation.
Yeah, so we really started with asking our educators, asking our educational leaders about where they are in their own implementation and adoption. Within our large system, we wanted to make sure that everyone had a voice contributing. So during distance learning, we were able to survey our educators, over 14,000 educators out of our 25,000. And we asked them, what are those supplemental EdTech tools, EdTech solutions being utilized right now? From there, we were able to then dig in on which teaching and learning strategies are making high impact results for student achievement. So again, not only just having the tool or the solution drive us, but also looking at those strategies kind of going hand in hand. And then there's a third piece of co-designing the ongoing rigorous and relevant professional learning with side by side with the EdTech solution providers, because we want to make sure that it's contextualized for our students here in Los Angeles, especially around literacy, numeracy, and social emotional well-being. We really are ensuring that it's all aligned to our district's strategic plan. Our educators learned so much during the distance learning time that we wanted to make sure that when they returned to brick and mortar, they still kept those tools in their tool belt. So we were able to create a catalog with over 130 opportunities for educators to come in and continue that learning. One that is really popular, it's our hybrid learning strategies. This is an effort that we've launched to ensure that educators continue to refine those skills that they learned during the distance learning time, because so much on them, they invested so much, we invested so much, and we wanted to make sure that these learnings and this growth of their new skills and disposition continue to blossom and flourish.
I love the educator voice and all the survey work that you've been doing with educators. I'd be curious, Sean, one of my favorite parts about watching your career trajectory is chief of schools to chief academic officer, and kind of really understanding where the rubber meets the road from an implementation standpoint with principals. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit about how you're ensuring fidelity of implementation, and maybe with a little bit on what Houston is doing with those school leaders and buy-in there as well.
Yeah, sure. So one of the reasons that we approached HQIM with staged implementation is because we know that we would learn a lot from the first wave of schools. So we also wanted to make sure that the most underserved students had the first access to those materials. So we our transformation cohort of schools was the first adopter, and then we let people opt in the first year. So we ended up with 78 schools, as I said earlier. And really, as you said, I've been a chief of schools and I've been a CAO before. So I know that this is not going to work if we don't leverage principals. And they are the key lever in making change at schools. So I work very closely with the chief of schools here in the district. And my team works very closely with her team. So we do implementation walks together. We have a rubric that we use that we're looking for routine to skillful fidelity of implementation. And we also have done other things with teachers. We've done focus groups with teachers after these implementation. We have some set implementation walks because we have metrics for how we're doing. But then we have opportunities for teachers to have informal feedback sessions. We invested very heavily in coaches at all of our schools that are implementing. So those coaches are coming together every Friday, and they are learning. It's pretty remarkable that across the city, which is over 700 square miles, that the problems are largely the same in implementation. So Fridays are opportunities for problem of practice meetings with our coaches. Our schools office team participates in those at certain times of the year, so that we really are modifying our professional development as we go. And next year, we've learned a lot this year in how we implement, and we're making some changes. Just this morning, I was on a call talking about how we need to have panels, or not panels, but teachers and principals that have been implementing this year. They need to be part of the training, and they need to, because they have the lived experience. And we know the first year of any implementation is difficult, but this is really difficult because this really is grade level instruction. And, there's a lot of concern coming from the pandemic that kids were below grade level, but we know that if we don't give them a grade level foundation and help them access the curriculum through scaffolds, they're never going to get ahead. So that takes a lot of mindset changes with adults. And so that's really what we've been focused on. But the collaboration between schools and academics is critical. And I'm convinced that we would not be where we are today if we did not have the buy-in from the school support officers who supervise principals, and my team collaborating together, along with special education, multilingual. Those divisions report up to me, but we have really tried to de-silo our work and really approach it as a team.
It's super helpful. I know you mentioned the HQIM, the high quality instructional materials implementation, and a lot of those resources are digital, maybe with some printed elements.
Yeah.
But I'd be curious, as you mentioned, kind of change management, in quotations marks, little c, little m. Do you feel like at this point, teachers really have bought into using digital instructional materials? And has that been a change from before the pandemic to now? What's the pulse from teachers on those resources?
I really think in a district with this size, I think you're going to find a spectrum of people. I think we do have definitely some early adopters, and then we have some people that are slower to embrace the change. And that's okay. We meet people where they are and try to bring them along. Next year, we are moving more digital in some areas, so that we'll have print for younger kids, K through 2, and then digital more for 3 through 8 for math. But there'll be an option still for print for people that are not there. But one of the ways that we were able to do that is we are right now working with a focus group of teachers from varying skill levels and varying levels of understanding and acceptance of the shift to more digital curriculum. Because we really want to, before we just put something out digital, we want to make sure we test it, and we want to make sure it's easier on teachers. What we don't want to do is make it even more difficult for teachers to implement. So I think, I would say we have a wide spectrum of people that are implementing this, and that's why we're doing these kind of test groups to see what is going to work the best for them. We're also, throughout the year, have been taking video of teachers who are implementing with fidelity, and we have now a professional library that teachers can go and look. We're setting up some lab classrooms so that people that have not yet adopted will be able to go and see kids that look like their kids at their school that are adopting, so they can get used to this. So we're starting training for next year's rollout, actually next week, all the way from next week to the rest of the year. We have several sessions built in for leaders and teachers to be able to kind of play with this a little bit and also help inform our digital strategies. I would say that we're kind of in the middle of like making decisions on how digital will be and versus how much print we'll have.
Got it. No, I love the idea of showing what's possible in how the instruction works. It's so smart. Sophia, I know you all have also been doing very similar work in looking at data around implementation and trying to use that to inform then what solutions kind of stay and persist and are a broader part of the district's instructional strategy. So I'd love for you to share a little bit about how you're using data to support adoption and to drive usage, and what kind of metrics you look at from both from providers that you ask solution providers for and that you get from the district to determine what's working.
Right. So I know, one of my biggest lessons learned over the last 8 years in this space is that sometimes the metrics doesn't tell us. They don't tell us the whole story. It's really not until you go into that classroom and have a conversation with the educator, have a conversation with our principals. So whenever I see usage data, yes, it's telling me there's a great connectivity. Students can sign in, but it's really not telling me until I get into that classroom, until I meet with that principal. So with that being said, we are looking at these opportunities where EdTech can be a support, right? It's not going to solve everything. We know it's a means to an end. Because, and I can't stop talking about it. I'm just so thrilled, over the moon about our strategic plan. And in our strategic plan, we have some very solid goals for numeracy, literacy, and social emotional well-being, amongst others, but those are the ones I'm really focused in on right now. And resources to help accomplish those goals, you're going to see the ISTE standards, which is a very dynamic framework. You're going to see resources and frameworks like universal design for learning. I heard it mentioned earlier, and as well as the MTSS, the multi-tier systems of support. So yes, while we have, our metrics and the supports that our EdTech tools are giving us, also still remember that we have these foundational frameworks that are going to continue to help elevate these additional EdTech tools and resources. In one other place that we're making a really concerted effort is when we look at joy and wellness, right? What are some resources, EdTech resources that can help us in this space? We're looking at, and we've cited in our strategic plan, the digital citizenship competencies. These are a resource, especially knowing how much time our scholars are spending and thriving in the digital world. Anna, you mentioned your littles, how much time they're spending, how engaged they are, but we want to make sure that they have these competencies while they are navigating the digital spaces, And back in around December, November, the NAEP scores were released. So that's another set of data that helps us to really navigate accomplishing our goals that we've set forth in our strategic plan. So, they do go hand in hand with some tried, tested, and true frameworks, UDL, MTSS, ISTE standards, and the DigSit competencies.
Yeah. I think that's really helpful. And I love also, Sue brought up in the chat, the idea of taking a more holistic set of metrics when we think about EdTech implementation, which I think is really important. Leanne, I know you mentioned engagement, in particular with regard to some of the supplemental instructional materials that you're using in Orange County. I'm curious to know, Are you measuring engagement? Is that something that you look at from your office? And how do you think about that as a more comprehensive view of what's happening with the fidelity of implementation?
Yes, we do look at engagement from our office on our walks, and we calibrate with our principals. Sophia and you, all of you have mentioned the power of instructional leadership. And I heard Sean mention about working closely with principals. And that's what we have devoted this year. Our Instructional Leadership Institute is going to be on the K-5 literacy for the elementary world. And engagement comes in that piece. And so to make a connection with our students and have them be able to want to persist in the work, it is a system that our teachers are learning. And so one of the ways that we're trying to support that is we have instructional coaches in all schools and digital learning teams in all schools. And so when we look at beyond that initial rollout, we have been embedding tools and these strategies through our facilitative coaching series, when we train all of our coaches, with our new teacher induction, our beginning teacher programs, our CRMs, our curriculum lesson plans that we make for our students. So we're trying to catch everyone from the very beginning all the way through that coach that is coaching the teachers, those mentors, and all the way to the principals, coming together, listening to them with their feedback. And it was around engagement. So walking with them, calibrating, taking a look at how many are engaged, and being able to come up with next steps action plans for our schools to support them. And what do they need? Ask them, what do you need? What does that teacher need? And what does she want? Or what does he want? And be able to come in and support them to where we're in it together. So those have been pieces that our PD has been based on, and all around teacher feedback. And then we also, from our world, we do roll our teachers into automatic. There's 2 asynchronous courses that they go through each year to continue to fine tune their skills. And they have a menu of selections. And like I believe Sean mentioned, a library of resources, all recordings to where they can go back and see, and it be personalized for our staff, but with our students, really making sure that our teachers understand the programs, that they feel confident, that they understand what the data says, but let me listen to you read also, and put it all together. And then we can do enrichment, some really interesting AI tools with listening to students read, and then comparing that to make sure that we get a well-rounded picture and we haven't missed anything.
I love that you mentioned professional learning, because I was actually going to ask everyone that if today's teacher, we hear a lot that they don't necessarily want to go offsite and spend a day or multiple days in face-to-face PD. There's a place for face-to-face PD, but there's kind of this idea of some of it asynchronous, some of it in a small group, virtual, some face-to-face. And it sounds like in Orange County, Leanne, that you all are providing those asynchronous courses, video libraries. I'm curious, Sophia and Sean, are you all looking at online professional learning options for your teachers?
Absolutely. 720 square miles, 25,000 educators, another 800 school site leaders. So what we found during distance learning, our participation just shot up. But that engagement piece, we had to be really, really mindful of, and the way in which we designed some of our asynchronous courses, because we just didn't want, folks just clicking through. No, we really leveraged kind of all the buttons that we have in our learning management system. So yes, we have continued the we have lots of synchronous, and some asynchronous. We have seen especially in our certification programs, the asynchronous really works well. This semester, I'm really excited to say that our physical computing courses are going to be back in person, right? We need to feel those robots, and we need to play and have some of those opportunities. But definitely, we've seen increases in our net promoter scores. Some of our sessions from pre-pandemic to during distance learning and now have really skyrocketed. We're in the 90s in some of our net promoter scores. So it's been received very well.
Yeah, and I would just add, we are also doing a mix of synchronous and asynchronous for our high quality instructional materials. That is a lot of in-person, because we want people to collaborate across schools, because sometimes you're the only third grade teacher, so we want you to be able to meet. But even some of those are held virtually. But yeah, we do definitely have a mix of both.
It's interesting because we think so often EdTech being what the student is experiencing, but I love that you all have broadened it to what teachers are experiencing as well. One other question before we get to the Q&A, and there are some great questions that have already been dropped in about examples of successful implementations and other things, but I wanted to quickly talk about inclusion and how you all are thinking about digital inclusion for all learners, English language learners, students with special needs and diverse learning needs. Sean, I'm looking at you because I know Kachara Bradford from your team is actually going to be, I think, speaking about this at South by Southwest, but would love to hear how you all think about the needs of all learners and really designing and using technology to support that.
Yeah, so we also are pretty much one-to-one. Well, we are one-to-one in our secondary schools. Elementary, it's almost. Some schools are, some schools aren't, but mostly they are. So first of all, we just wanted to have standard equipment for everybody so that we are working from the same place, and then we could design learning experiences to meet the needs of all of our learners. So in special education, our teachers that, sometimes general ed curriculum is thought of as, that's for general ed teachers, but in reality, 85% of our students who receive special education services are in general ed classes every day. So we made sure when we were training our teachers on the digital, both digital and other components of our math and literacy curriculums that we're rolling out this year, that special ed teachers were invited and participated, that they're teaching side by side their general ed teacher counterparts, as well as our multilingual. Our coaches, our instructional coaches for bilingual and dual language programs, they've also been included. We're also right now, one of the things we've learned this year is that we need to do a better job of helping teachers scaffold for those diverse learners. So we're actually creating a playbook right now for some high leverage strategies for those learners as they implement Eureka, Carnegie, or Amplify, which are the products we chose. So I would say it's also a work in progress. It's something that we're learning from as we're utilizing more and more technology tools to help make sure that students either who are learning English proficiency still, or who are students who are receiving special ed services, that they also can access that robust curriculum because for the large majority of them, they are held to the same high standards as everybody else. So we want to make sure that they're included.
That's great. Sophia or Leanne, do either of you all want to talk about digital inclusion?
And I'm so glad that, Sean, you brought up for our diverse learners. One area, and I mentioned it earlier, the universal design for learning and the multiple tiered systems of support, ensuring that, when we are designing for our students with EdTech solutions, that we don't forget about these frameworks, right? What are going to be, the multiple ways to engage our students? How about the multiple ways our students learn content? And I think EdTech does a great when powered and when harnessed well, multiple ways for students to show their learning. Really remembering how to multiple ways of engagement, right? Where that's always the top of mind, the learning of the content and multiple ways to show their learning, but also remembering about our leadership, because we go in and we support our educators. There's another framework that I mentioned earlier called triple track. We triple track the way in which we support instruction, where our principal supervisors, they might be seeing how are these strategies helping me in my learning? How, with the second track being for our school leaders, how might these strategies help build the capacity of the school leaders, with ultimately having our track 3, where how might these strategies support students learning in the classroom? Again, because we want to make sure that, especially with our digital tools, what are those multiple ways of engagement, multiple ways to learn the content, and those multiple ways where students can demonstrate their learning, their knowledge.
Love that. Leanne, anything you'd add on diverse learners?
I'd like to add, we do take it serious that one-to-one is for all students. And as we go to great lengths to try to ensure that it is available to all, a simple example is that we license read and write for Google across our enterprise to support universal access, because we have a lot of students, whether they are English language learners or they may have a disability, screen readers, translation, many more, then they all integrate into our other tools like our Google Drives and websites and even our learning management system. So that has been important, but we also have kind of taken our professional learning into our families and to our family learning. And so training and information are provided to our families on bi-weekly through a tech tips. They all get a call and they get a newsletter, and it talks to them about how to access and also leverage digital tools based on the learner variability. So those come out, and then it sparks some conversations. And we're really trying to not only work in school and at home and helping our families become, because they are the first teachers of our students, and being able to give them the resources and put them in their homes, as well as what we have here in school, so that it is unified and we're working together.
That's great. And are the resources available in multiple languages, Leanne?
Yes, they are. And we have translation for our languages, but we have 4 main languages, Spanish, English, Creole, and Portuguese, that are our main languages here. But we have a language line that has hooked us with resources, and we have been acquiring those so that digitally everyone can access it, whether it is an impairment visually, hearing, or a language barrier.
Wonderful. Thank you. Well, I think we're going to jump to some of the questions that have come in. So thank you to those of you who have submitted them already. And a couple of them I think I can just see, so I can start running through them. But I do like this idea of looking to best practices. And Megan asked, of your most successful implementations, what are 1 to 2 best practices that you'd like to see from more service providers and partners? Sophia, do you want to go first with your answer on that one?
Yes. One of my biggest lessons learned, and has really made a big impact, not only within our system, but I've seen it trickle across to other schools in our nation, is partnering with the EdTech solution provider. From time to time, they want to give you something, and here it's already prepackaged, we've done all the work for you. And that's easy just to say, all right, here you go, teachers. But what we've found, when that used to happen, doesn't happen anymore, there wasn't that much opportunity to make it our own. And there wasn't that much buy-in. Earlier talked about organizational change management, having that piece, partnering with the solutions provider to contextualize it for the educators in the system has really helped educators see themselves in the solutions, and most importantly, see their students represented in these solutions. So for us, that's been a real big win, partnering with our solution providers.
I love that representation piece. And I think you even have started asking providers that on the outset, how do you address bias? How do you ensure all of our learners are reflected, which I think is such a powerful signal. Sean, what do you think? I know you're working with a lot of really great partners right now. What are the best practices?
Yeah, I think what Sophia mentioned is also true for us. We want to make it the context for Houston needs to be at the forefront. And, for me, I want to make sure that we're partnering with whomever the service provider is so that we can transition to doing the professional learning on our own, because we have a large professional learning organization within the school district. So it's really working side by side with people so that we can build capacity in our own organization, especially as you mentioned, it's been nice years, the last couple of years with ESSER dollars, but that money's going away. And so we need to be able to build capacity in our own organization to continue the work. And so I think that's the biggest thing for me is when I work with somebody that they're going to be partners in designing it and then having an off ramp for us to take over the work.
Just quick follow up on that, Sean.
Yeah.
How many years ahead are you planning for that? Like, what is the time horizon for thinking about an implementation and getting your capacity up for professional learning?
So, I mean, for this year, for math, for example, we relied heavily on partners. Next year, we can dial that back because now my own people have expertise. Though we'll still need them, and then I will expand my internal team more to support more schools. So, by the third year, really, it's an internal operation, pretty much.
That's super helpful.
It's a district-wide implementation.
Super, super helpful. Leanne, what about you all in Orange County? What have you observed? Who are some partners that have really done great work and maybe brought additional value that you'd want to see more folks do?
Well, we've had a lot of success with having the conversations around the buy-in and the purpose and what the purpose was, and the desire, I think, that the teachers voiced was to be able to make it our own for our learners. And how do you do that? And so having a PD team and a customer success team help us. This is the fidelity. This is how we get there. And yes, this is how you can bring in some of your flair to having the conversations to where the teachers have their own voice and style, but really maintaining, to fidelity. And then how are we going to sustain this? What have we learned? And then, so where maybe we can stand it up with our own side-by-side PD and be able to increase our teachers' ability to have our students reach proficiency and to grow. So those have been focuses about our learning, but really even including multicultural engagement.
And can I just add one thing? So I think some of the pushback you get when you're implementing high quality instructional materials is the deprofessionalization of teachers. And so I think it's really important for partners that work with us. We don't want our teachers to read from a script. That is not the point of implementing HQIM, but that gets lost a lot of times in training. So you have to really be very, honest and open about that at the beginning. How we don't want teachers to throw out everything they've ever learned about teaching to read a script. So I think that's another practice. That's one of the things we've learned is that people took fidelity of implementation in a way that we didn't necessarily mean for them to take it. And so we've had to go back and re-message some of that. So I think that's also as you're starting on that journey, that's another thing to just keep in mind.
Mm-hmm. And being a partner that can support on the messaging at the outset to make sure everyone's aligned. What about data? I'm curious to know, from your partners, do you feel like you expect, some level of data analysis and digging into how things are working and reporting back to you from their perspective on how things are going?
So for us, we have our own research department, but we do expect, we want the tools that we use to be able to talk to our tools. So we spend a lot of time when we're implementing new digital products. They work with our instructional technology team as well as our research team to make sure that we're going to be able to get the data out of those systems we need to be able to do the analysis that we need to do on our end. But we don't necessarily expect them to do it for us. We can do that ourselves as long as there's talking. Our systems can
Yeah,
talk to each
as
other.
well as they can. Okay, that's amazing. What about you, Sophia? Do you have any data expectations from providers, or is that
Oh,
something?
yes, absolutely. And the lesson learned there is as soon as you go into a contract with your solution providers, start setting your goals, right? Don't wait until the contract is up for renewal and start saying, hey, do you think we're going to be renewed? Do you think we're going to be renewed? You know, so let's see, did we meet some of the benchmarks that we that we've set together? And is it aligned to our strategic plan? Literacy, numeracy, SEL. So that's really been some of our lessons learned.
Leanne, anything you'd add on data?
So using data is important to us, and like Sean, we all have our own departments that we're going to dissect the data, but being able to have some initial reports that track maybe essential skills or that can be at the teacher's fingertips, that where we struggle sometimes with differentiating instruction, but having those tools to be able to give us a snapshot of how that student is progressing, what are those essential skills that they're really needing some extra time with, and then are there any trends that we're seeing? So sometimes we look at data from our EdTech partners, and then we lay it on our own systems where our classroom walkthroughs, using our tools with that, what are we seeing in other data sources, and can put it all together and get a much better picture. So that is really important to us, that we have some sort of goals like Sophia shared and expectations.
So important. We had another question come in about screen time and how you implement an EdTech solution if there are technology screen time limitations in place. If there's a dosage recommendation from the provider and there's screen time limitations. I'm curious, I have not, to be honest, been following screen time like limitations within schools. Is that something that you all have confronted in your districts?
No, I wouldn't say. I mean, if something is you're supposed to use it 45 minutes, for example, 3 times a week, we try to do that to make sure it's being implemented appropriately, and then we're looking at data to see if that actually does make a difference. So we're looking for that. But we also, I mean, at the end of the day, the teacher is the magic bullet is the trained classroom teacher that has at his or her fingertips a lot of strategies, of which digital integration is one. So we really try to, take the emphasis off of the digital tool and on the expertise of the teacher and how you use that to improve learning for students. So I think, I think that's one of the things we learned, that we don't want to repeat what happened at home learning, because kids were sitting in front of a screen all day and being very frustrated in some cases. So we want to use technology, and it's magical, and there's lots of things it can do, but what it can't replace is the magic of a teacher.
Leanne, I know you mentioned flipping the classroom in our kind of prep session. Is there there are a lot of new laws and requirements in place in Florida, but is there anything around screen time? Is that anything that you've had to deal with there, or has it been easy?
So it is, during the pandemic, obviously we had concerns, and then coming out of it, what would it be? Are students going to be just hooked to their computer with no interaction with their teacher, and all of these misconceptions? So being able to have those conversations, not only with our school board so that they could share that out to the community, and also us trying to share that message, but trying to make sure that there are breaks, and that it is not the screen time is not too much, but it is not mandated by the state. But the teacher is going to be the facilitator and the vehicle of instruction, and using the tools to fidelity with exactly what our kids need is kind of where our focus has been. And so the conversations, we address them one-to-one usually.
Sophia, what about in LA?
Yeah, earlier I shared with you in our strategic plan, one of the resources for joy and wellness are the DigSit competencies. And there are 5 competencies. One of the competencies is balanced, making informed decisions about how I prioritize my time and activities online. So, during a lot of our professional learning, and we also have a parent academy where we share this with parents. But a resource that really helps folks, our educators, our parents, our community really understand and kind of contextualize this phenomenon around screen time is one of my favorite books. That's what I got off camera to get. Digital for Good. And the author is CEO of ISTE, Richard Collada. This has some really poignant vignettes and stories to help us understand, we're the first generation to be raising families, leading schools in this digital world. So I highly recommend it, especially when those conversations start to bubble up, or even before they start to bubble up.
Thanks, Sophia. There was a question that came in, Leanne, specifically for you, just around some of the recent changes in state policy, and just, I don't know if you might not want to answer the question directly as written in terms of challenges, but I guess maybe any advice that you would give for potential partners and how they have conversations with districts in Florida about those changes.
So there is new legislation, and I was just typing an answer into there. So there is new legislation that has allowed us to go back and look at everything that we are, from the beginning teacher to the classroom for all of those. So it has allowed us to review, which has been good because we've been able to revamp a lot of our materials, but there are a lot of misconceptions around that we were teaching things that were not being taught in Florida, but the new legislation has caused us to pause and to look at exactly the textbooks, what's in our media center, and has allowed us to use some of our funds to replace new digital libraries with using those funds to upgrade, I would say. And then we also have had to have conversations about curriculum, and but no main changes, because we have not taught the things that were forbidden to teach in Florida.
Thank you, Leanne. I know there's been a lot going on down there. I think it's actually related to one of the questions that came in that, Sophia, it was great that you shared the LAUSD list of supplemental Edtech resources that are being used. But the question was, are teachers using the supplemental tools that districts have chosen for them? And I would love for you guys maybe just to quickly talk about and it came in the context of outside of HQIM. I think, Sean, it was while you were talking about the specific core curriculum, but do you find that teachers are using the tools that districts put out there, and would be curious to get your take on that?
Sure. So we monitor, of course, what people are using, what's on our network. There are things that we've purchased centrally for schools, and then there are things that schools make decisions on their own to purchase using their local budget. But we do monitor the usage of all those tools. And if we find that, we can see, again, you're seeing people log on. That's what you're seeing from the baseline analytics that we have. But then we can do further work to see if school is using, a particular tool. For example, is there any outcome? Is there any, return on investment in terms of academic achievement? So we look for those things as we make renewal decisions every year. We're looking at our budget and deciding what we're going to invest the dollars in. So we don't continue things that teachers aren't using, or that we can't find any link to academic achievement. We don't continue those purchases.
That makes sense. Sophia, anything you would add to your list that you put up in the answer?
It has been an evolving list, as to when we first started that list. Again, that was all based on teacher feedback, teacher input, from what they were already utilizing, and then starting to make connections to our goals, strategic plan goals. But, just exactly what Sean mentioned, I really concur, 100% with those comments, because we do have to take a look. Is this solution, maybe it was initially providing what we were looking for, maybe it's not anymore. Maybe there's something else that can provide those, help us get to where we want to be with our learners and their academic achievement.
Great. A question just coming back to the initial topic of ESSER, and curious as we, think about, crystal ball, in 2025. So after the obligation deadline of September 30th of 2024, do you all think that we will fundamentally be in a different place in terms of how EdTech is used to support instruction than we were in 2020? And do you think that this funding will have accelerated that process? Don't know if this wasn't this was not one we prepped for, so take your time.
I do think we'll be in a different place, and we're looking now because we're planning now for the end of that funding, and we are doing some priority exercises about like what do we want to continue to fund after ESSER is gone. So and there are some things that we have learned from ESSER and from digital tools that we've been using that we want to prioritize into the general fund budget or title or whatever. So I do think that I think it'll be mixed. Like I think some things, the things that we're really spending a lot of time researching, the connection to student achievement, I think yes, we'll definitely those things we'll find ways to fund them. But I do, I think there's just a lot of things out there, and for us in a decentralized district, I'm sure probably LA has the same experience, that it can be hard to get your arms around when you have so many schools and you have so many things out there that not only are centrally purchased but purchased by the district. So we are trying to use our research team to do effectiveness studies of the things that are used most frequently. So hopefully we have an answer to that by 2025.
Great answer. Sophia?
Yeah, I definitely see that there will be more alignment to what schools and districts want to leverage the tools for. Earlier I mentioned the co-design. So if I do have that crystal ball, that EdTech solution providers will be investing more in the area of co-designing, co-partnering, just like Sean mentioned earlier, that sustainability. That's one of the questions we get all the time when we want to purchase anything. How will this be sustained? Will be sustained once this contract ends? More integration, more easier solutions, ways in which we integrate on the technological side. And I do anticipate there's going to be more advocacy for additional dollars. We've ramped up our advocacy efforts. That will continue.
I love that. Leanne, any predictions from your side in 2025, what EdTech will look like?
Well, I love the advocacy word, because I do see that with our families now, because of so many new innovations that are out there, that are coming, that are moving into the educational space. And then where we do academic return on investment, the digital tools are so popular with the teachers because of the growth that they have seen in their students with proficiency and learning gains, not just learning gains, but increasing the proficiency, that grade level proficiency. And when you look at the research and the results, that's where we hope that we can fine tune. And there will be a place for EdTech digital tools, because our parents and families are advocating for that now, and can't wait to see what is going to happen. Our strategic plan is called OCPS 2025, and we hope to have a lot of really great results at that point.
Wonderful. And I did put a link to an article that I just quickly found to share with folks. This was a conversation focused largely on ESSER, but related is that in the bipartisan omnibus bill that passed right before the new year, there's actually additional funding that was included for Edtech R&D, which was incredibly exciting, going to the Institute for Education Sciences. And a big part of that will be looking for how to better evaluate the efficacy of scalable solutions. So hopefully that's just the beginning of a federal investment in EdTech R&D. And a lot of folks I think that are on the line today have been working on that and advocating for that. Back to your point about advocacy, Sophia, and there's talk of potentially even getting to like, what would a $1 billion IES budget look like, you know, and maybe increases in Title I too. And I think that the storytelling of the work that you all are doing in your districts is absolutely critical to making the case here in DC, where we're located at Whiteboard, to continuing to increase those federal investments to support these students that need and deserve the support you all are providing. So with that, Emily, are there any questions that we didn't answer in the chat? Just looking at that.
We got all the questions, but you know, we have time if anybody else has a question. And in the meantime, our awesome producer just posted our poll, and I just want to say we take your response to these questions super seriously. We really taken them to heart and make adjustments based on your feedback. So please take a minute to quickly complete our poll. And then Anna, so no more questions from the audience right now. If you have more questions for our speakers.
Yeah. Well, like, I guess just one last one that maybe is kind of a lightning round. You know, I think that ESSER seems like a black box in some ways to people from the outside in terms of who within a district is thinking about the funding, how decisions are being made, of course, because it's distributed based on a Title I funding formula. Houston and Orange County and LA got a lot of that funding. Not every district received that much funding. Again, it's based on the Title I formula. But I'm just curious, are you all having, Sean, you mentioned you're starting to think about budget planning for post-2025, but are your conversations about ESSER funds inclusive of the whole cabinet? And is EdTech, do you feel like you have kind of a voice in thinking about the funding as those decisions are being made?
Yes, we do have a regular ESSER meeting actually with the cabinet, and of course, a lot of the money that we got has been allocated to academics because that's the core function of the school district. So we definitely have conversations, and we've had to reprioritize things over. You know, now we're looking at what's going to happen next. So we have made some adjustments to our ESSER funding along the way. I mean, a lot of adjustments along the way. And we, you know, when we find that we've allocated something and it's not being spent, then we, you know, have a conversation about why that is, and maybe we need to reallocate it to a different project. The need is great, and so there's, you know, there's no. I mean, we have our money allocated to spend. There is not $1 that we're giving back. And in fact, we've had to go back and trim some things so that we can do some other things that were high priority. So that's a regular conversation we have. And it's not just me that gets to make, I mean, this everybody on the cabinet gets to make that decision along, and we have input from school leaders as well.
That's really helpful. Leanne, what about in Orange County?
So we do have regular conversations with our whole cabinet as well as our chiefs. Our chiefs meet regularly also, but we're fortunate at this time that we have a new superintendent, and she is on her 100-day, first 100 days, and she has been on a listening tour, and we have received a lot of input from stakeholder groups and teachers. So all of our high schools, she only has 2 more to do. And so hearing from our teachers, our staff members at the schools, our parents and our students in those, and bringing those conversations back to the cabinet and having the discussion, and then involving the other leaders that our boots on the ground.
Wonderful. What about in LA?
I'm so glad you brought up this question because, you know, and I think it's like a bingo checkbox, how many times I'm saying strategic plan. I'm just so excited about it. So similar to Leanne with our new superintendent with the 100-day plan, and then what led into the strategic plan, there is a pillar and a priority around sustainable budgeting. So within that piece, you know, we have the specific strategies. So to know that we have a framework when these decisions are being made is really going to help us achieve these goals that we have for our students. And again, in literacy, numeracy, and social emotional learning. So I'm really excited to see how that is going, our strategic plan is going to really guide us into making those sound decisions about whatever type of funding we may have at our fingertips.
Great. Thank you, Sophia. And I do have the link. I'm just clarifying that it's good for external sharing to a memo from David DeShriver, who is our SVP of policy and research based on the guidance from the Department of Education. So I'm just getting the green light to share it with everybody who's on the call, but I'll make sure that it does go out afterwards. So that will be coming as well. I do know that, again, from a sustainability standpoint, that clarification from the Department of Education, we had a little ed funding nerd party here in DC when when the Department of Education clarified that. So we'll get that out to everybody, and just really appreciate everyone joining today, and especially Sean, Sophia, Leanne, you taking the time out of your very busy district schedules to give some insight into how this funding is playing out in your district, how you're supporting and serving all of your learners. I think it's inspiring to everyone to hear what you all are doing, and look forward to continuing the conversation and telling the great stories that are coming out of your district. So Emily, I'll turn it to you to wrap up, and thank you for having us today.
Thank you. And Anna, you're such a pro moderator. That was such an awesome conversation. And I also want to say thank you so much to Dr. Bird, Dr. Bradshaw, and Ms. Mendoza. I really was excited to hear about your plans for this not being just a flash in the pan, one and done, get the money, make something happen, and then forget about it. You all have the plans so clear of how this is going to be sustained after the ESSER money runs out, which is super exciting and super important for the students, of course, and for sort of the ongoing learning recovery that's going to happen for the next several years. So thank you to everybody. And we just want to remind everybody about upcoming webinars. As we talked a lot today about universal design learning, and we have a session next Tuesday focused on that at 3 p.m. on the 7th. Learning to read, applying universal design for learning. Then we have a Crucible of Practice Salon on the 14th. Opportunity culture, positive impacts for educators and students, and then another 3 p.m. on Tuesday the 14th, creating environments and conditions for thriving kindergarten. So that's another in our series with New America. And I did mention a couple of other future webinars where we don't have the full details yet. Keep an eye on your email for those, and then they all are now added to our registration page, which Sarah is now posting in the chat. So you can actually go ahead and register for those, even though we don't have the information all set yet, but please keep an eye on your email. Also, everything that you've seen posted in the chat, all of the resources, and we're going to get the one that Anna just mentioned. We are going to send that to all of you in a follow-up message. All of those resources will be there. So thank you again to our awesome speakers. Thanks to all of you for joining us today, and we'll see you again next week, hopefully. Take care, everybody. Bye.